how are you? I'm so
Yeah,
happy to see you.
you too. Yeah, it's been a minute or three.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm well. Yeah, I'm doing all right here. It's kind of been a different life for sure, I guess, for all of us. But
Yeah.
I can't complain too much about it. Actually, I've found a lot of good things in it too. So
Good.
a lot of people are asking me, oh, things are opening up. You must be super excited to get back out there. And I'm like,
I was never not out there.
yeah, exactly. Like someone said, "Oh, music is back." I was like, "Music never left."
For anyone who may not know who you are, do you want to just give a little bit of an introduction as to who you are as a person and artist?
Well, I'm a musician, creator of music. People primarily associate me with my cello playing, which is, I guess, kind of the main thing now. And But I'm, I guess, a very non-traditional cellist, and I studied classical music for a long time. But what I'm trying to do now is just to really have my own voice and just be sort of a distinct artist in that respect, and to do various things to play in different contexts and to try to break new ground with the instrument, I guess, to maybe show some sides of it that people might not be aware of. And obviously, I'm a composer, so composing and playing for me are very much like inextricably linked, and improvisation is also a big part of what I do, and I think it's becoming more and more central to my practice, I guess, as a player, but also even in the music that I write and record. And I also play a number of other instruments, but I kind of have kept that on the down low for a few years because I've been so busy playing cello, and just trying to keep up with all that.
Do you want to reveal the other instruments, or is that still kind of
No, I mean it's been an ongoing thing, I guess, but it's more that in the past I used to play a lot of different instruments, and then over time it kind of got narrowed down out of necessity. So as a teenager, I was just kind of, I was just interested in music, and I just wanted to kind of play everything. I didn't really think that one needed to focus and just kind of make these decisions. I think as one does at that age, it's sort of like you just have everything kind of thrown at you. All the possibilities are still open.
yeah.
Uh, and anyway, so I started learning cello, but I also started learning piano like around the same time. So I've been playing piano for a long time, and also teaching myself guitar not long after starting to learn cello. And then when I went to middle school, there was like a drum kit there, and there's like a bass guitar, and I thought, I need to learn these too. So I kind of got obsessed with drums for like a year or two. I just I couldn't look at a set of drums without wanting to play them.
Yeah.
And I had a few lessons, but then I mostly taught myself from there. And so I kind of played all those instruments like through high school, and then yeah, going to university, starting undergrad in cello, was sort of like, okay, now I have to kind of spend more time on this. um and so the other stuff, I kind of still maintained it for a while, and then it started to kind of fade more and more into the background. But still, during undergrad, I played in this metal band on drums, so I was still like pretty involved doing that. But now it's like, yeah, honestly, I enjoy going to other instruments, but I do it a bit more for myself, really, for my own sort of creative fulfillment. Because when you study an instrument formally, what happens is you become super aware and super judgmental of everything. Like the way you look at it, it becomes more like your job in a way, and as opposed to just something that you enjoy doing in and of itself. uh
Something that
you know
you play literally.
yeah, because we play music. That's,
We
we don't
play
work
it.
music. Yeah,
We play
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Although I think that when you go deep enough into one avenue with a certain instrument, that does affect your perception of the others, and what is possible, and where you feel limited. Um, but it's just been this path that's kind of, I think the path takes you in a lot of cases. You don't take the path.
Hmm.
And I had imagined, as a teenager, like, yeah, I'm gonna play in a band. I'm gonna have my own band, and do that stuff. And I did, and I recorded some music. But then I just got so busy with the cello stuff, and then the cello became like so fascinating because I was learning so much about it and trying to improve very quickly. And then all of a sudden I thought, oh, I'm in all these situations where I'm being asked to play cello and stuff. Like all throughout university, I was gigging and being asked to play on these different things in styles of music that I didn't know really very well prior to that. And so I had to just kind of figure it out. And so that forced me to find these different ways of playing, as opposed
Mhm.
to sort of applying like a classical music perspective to everything. It was more like using the classical technique, but then every project required its own sound and
Mhm.
even its own personality from me, actually.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know, so it's like a different side of yourself that comes out in that music, kind of like being an actor or something.
Mhm.
And so all these experiences, this kind of random experiences of like, you know, being a side man and doing session work and having my own bands and stuff, but doing almost everything on cello, forced me to become very versatile and to kind of uh, just sort of find approaches that I liked that were more personal to me.
Mhm.
And I think from that, you know, from a few years of doing that, I sort of found a voice that I felt was more my own and that where I felt more comfortable, especially compared with playing a standard repertoire where it's like, you know, that everybody else knows it, everybody else can play it, you know, tons of people have played it and recorded it well. So you're already kind of doing a thing that a lot of other people have done
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
And for me, that's like the least appealing thing. You
Mhm.
know, I've always been the type of person where if I saw that everybody was going that way, okay, everybody does this thing, everybody owns this, everybody likes this, then I would just want to go right
Mhm.
the other way. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I'm not going there. You know, I'm gonna be over here where no one else is, you know, in this corner of the room. And like y'all are out there, you know, having your party. It's like, no. I'm gonna be over here and I'm gonna be the first one doing this thing. It's just, it's not that I ever really thought about that consciously. It's just in my nature. So what I've noticed over the years, already like going to grad school and then finishing school and then, you know, just doing my own thing, is that um, you know, you start off kind of like on the ground and then you start kind of flying out into orbit and then all of a sudden you're like way out there in this like on the edge of the galaxy. You know what I mean? You're like,
Mhm.
oh, that's like I used to be over there, and like, you know what I mean? So then you feel very alienated in a way,
Mhm.
because you feel like you're such a different animal. You know, it's like you're yeah, you're kind of like a rare breed or something like that, which I think is kind of the case. But and it has its pros and its cons, really. You know, on
Mhm.
one hand, you kind of have this like refuge in which you feel secure of doing your thing and being yourself and speaking with your voice. But then on the other hand, you feel the resistance, and you know that what you're doing is not going to sell itself immediately to people. It's going to take much more time. You have to like console yourself and focus on the long game, not get impatient and think about, you know, the sort of the setbacks of like today or yesterday or tomorrow. It's like, okay, you know, can I sustain this? And eventually it will like, the truth of what you're doing, if you're doing something really different, will show through. It's about speaking your truth, and it's about saying the only thing that you know will reflect you in a completely transparent way. The rest can all go by the wayside. You know, for
Mhm.
me, it's like, if I want to introduce myself to someone, I have to do it through my music, because like they're not going to get it just from talking to me. They might get the wrong idea, I think. But I think the
Mhm.
music speaks clearly in a way that like some interaction, verbal interaction or whatever, won't really. And yeah, because of course, like that depends on the mood you're in and the time of day and, you know, all kinds of factors. But with the music, just I don't know, it's just been my experience in life also. Like a lot of people just kind of didn't really notice me, and then I'd start playing, and then all of a sudden they really wanted to know more about me, or like, oh, like, can I get your contact? Oh, I want to do something with you. Hey, you know, can you do this thing for me? It's like that's
Mhm.
been kind of my story, I guess. It's been my path, that like it's sort of like the music has kind of given me everything. It's sort of been like this,
Mm,
you
mhm.
know. And that's it feels like a sort of, I don't know. It's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice or some sort of like story where it's like you have this magic and all of a sudden like you could just make anything,
Mhm.
and it's like, okay, now I have furniture, now I have food, now I have like a car or whatever. Like the
Right.
music, the
Right.
music just kind of like just gives me everything. You know what I mean? But sometimes it's like
Yeah.
yeah, but if you could just make anything from nothing, it could be too much, or you could take it for granted, or you could just be
Mhm.
overwhelmed and not be able to appreciate any
Right.
one thing that you have. So one thing that has kind of dawned on me recently is that I think it's something that people who've gone to music school deal with, because it's like when you're in an environment where you're surrounded by other people that know the thing that you're doing, they're familiar with the material, they're familiar with how you produce the sound, how you uh, how you do everything on a mechanical level to like an intellectual level, then you kind of get used to people sort of like seeing right through you a little bit. And it's like they know when, oh yeah, I had a memory slip there, or that note was a bit out of tune, or should have vibrated on that note but you didn't, that type of thing. Rushing those 16th notes, whatever, like this type of stuff doesn't matter as much to most people.
Hmm.
I'm always like thinking about those things. I'm always trying to do this kind of quality control when I'm
Hmm.
playing or recording, always like kind of like surveying to make sure that everything is like a-okay on that level. But I realize sometimes you have to let yourself go a little bit, because there's a lot of things that even people who are actual musicians who know music well don't pick up on, or it's not necessarily as important to them as something else,
Hmm.
like the way you appeared in a certain section of the music, or yeah, like maybe just general dynamics or the quality of the sound.
Hmm.
Just things that are maybe a bit more general but maybe actually more important um, than
Right.
like correctness or accuracy,
Hmm.
uh, and that it's like it's more about the impressions for them. And I think that when we take in performances, especially in a live context, what we retain is visual memory
Hmm.
more than the auditory, and also emotional impressions.
Yeah. Well, it's reminding me so much of, I think it was Maya Angelou. She said people won't remember, they won't remember what you say or what you do. They'll remember how you made them feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Again, music is a social thing, especially if it's a in a live context. It's like um, people attend a concert not only just to hear music. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would just listen to recordings.
Yeah, of
You
course.
know, it's a social event, and part of that is the audience, but it's also the way the performer engages. You
Hmm.
know, the way the performer engages is everything, really, because a lot of people don't even understand what the music means, especially with instrumental music and non-programmatic music. It's not necessarily about anything. um, they have to be kind of told what to feel. Everybody has an opinion. I mean, if you play Bach, then it's the worst, because then everybody has an opinion, even if they don't really, if they can't play an instrument or they don't know the music, they
Yeah.
have an opinion of how they think it should be played because they, heard
Heard it.
move,
Yeah, exactly.
so that's the killer. You have to really be so dense when you play that stuff. Like you have to be like a stone wall, I think, like impenetrable. Nothing gets to you because
Or like,
yeah.
or like solid but porous. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
like you there's a period for letting things in, and you have to like, but it like goes through a filtering system maybe, and you
Yeah.
put it
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
context, and then there's a point where you have to close it off. Because I remember I was playing the third suite, the third cello suite, the C major, and I learned it. It was one of those times where I just spent way too long on it. I was just like,
Mhm.
I kept like rehashing it for things for like a year for various things. And I'm not saying that's too long in any context, but for me and that particular piece and the movements I was playing, it had gotten stale in my mind. But I had so many various encounters where I got feedback, but I had almost like too many, and then
Yeah.
it muddied the image for me of the like it muddied the crystal clear goal, because there was so much. It was like option paralysis, and then everyone feels strongly about their opinion.
Oh, I
Oh
have so much I can say about that. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that in the moment of performance, like you can't be a messenger for everybody where you're citing all the sources and you're saying, well, so and so said this. And so it's like, but what's your core argument? When I play for an audience, it's like I've come from a far off land and I have a message for them, and it's like of utmost importance, and I might die afterwards, but they need to know what it is. And
Wow.
it's like I need to transmit that message, and it's like a sacred thing for me. You know what I mean? It's like this very deep thing,
Mhm.
and that's my truth, you know. And if I can get that across in the performance, then that feels right to me, you know. And it needs to have that gravity. And so if you're like, but if your mind is like trying to sort of defragment from all these different
Mhm.
places and like try to synthesize them into one thing, like, I mean, you can't do that in the moment, right? Like you can't, the mind can't be that active in the performance. It needs to calm down
Mhm.
and let the intuition take over. It's the practice time where you can do that, or you can try things out and be open. But I think in the performance, like, you have to kind of just trust yourself. One thing I like to do with the solo Bach, because it's so flexible and it's such a kind of I don't want to say empty vessel, because that would do, you know, injustice to the amazingness of the music, but it is kind of like this clear vial, you know,
Mm.
where
That's a beautiful image.
you
Clear vibe.
can look you can look at it from these different angles, and the light that reflects from it is, you
Yeah.
know, maybe showing these different colors, and that depends on the angle that you're at and the time of day and all those things, you know. And I think that what I like to do, at least, is just improvise Bach. So it's like, you know, I know the notes in my body, I know the bowings I want to do and stuff like that, but then the way I play it is like an improvisation, you know,
Mhm.
and I just try to play it as though it's coming spontaneously out, as opposed to feeling like, you know, I already know what's coming and it's all kind of prepared.
That's so funny. That actually leads me to something I wanted to ask you because I've been thinking recently a lot about like I think there's this kind of trope that like creative people or artistic people they exist in a state of chaos and they deal with like flurries of inspiration, but like we both know that's not the full picture. I was curious like what your relationship with routine is and how you structure your days.
It depends a lot. So for example, last year I had more time, like everybody, for the
Yeah.
first few months, than, you know, all hell broke loose as it does
Yeah.
later on. But uh, when you have more time, it's easier to build certain habits sometimes, because sometimes it takes longer to begin.
Mhm.
Beginning is always the hardest part with anything. There's always some sort of mental block. And the biggest thing is excuses. And for me, I think that before that period, there was always something I could blame it on. And
Mhm.
then all of a sudden, like, everything kind of fell away. And I realized the only thing between me and what I want is my excuses.
Mhm.
So if I want to have those things, it's like, there's no reason why I can't have them. It's just that I'm making excuses, and my mind is constantly like, yeah, but this and this and this. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Just chattering, and it's like, when you just say, no, we're doing this now. Once you start, and once you start doing something regularly, and uh, it becomes actually unconscious,
Mhm.
then it's harder to break it, because our relationship with life, you know, I think it's basically divided between the conscious and the unconscious
Mhm.
mind and behaviors, you know. And when things become unconscious behaviors, they're habits, you know, and they may or may not be good habits,
Mhm.
but we're conditioned through repetition to do those things again and again. And so it's just a question of choosing the better habits that you feel will benefit you more in the long term, and trying to, you know, put in a big upfront investment that will allow you to do those things out of force of habit, as opposed to you know, needing to really coax yourself into it. You know, I always think about, I work with this band Leprous from Norway, and I've been you know, playing with them, you know, on tour and like on the records since 2017. And the thing with this band that it always happens, you know, regardless of any situations, there's always this kind of a Mission Impossible scenario where it's like, okay, we have to like record all this stuff, and it's like super difficult material in a short span of time. And and it's got to be at a very high level, because it's a very high level band. Everybody plays really well in that band, and, you know, the songs are very challenging. And there's always this kind of pressure, or it's like, okay, we've got to play all these shows in one weekend and, fly between all the shows. And it's like maybe very stressful, like getting in and out of the airports, and the itinerary is really kind of rushed and no one gets any sleep. And of course, all those things, it's sort of like, whoa, okay, now I have to do all this stuff. But um, once you've done it, you go, whoa, we did all of that in
Mm-hmm.
a very short period of time. So um, it feels very overwhelming, but sometimes if you really turn up the heat, I think you do get something out of it. Um, Whereas if you're always just trying to keep it on the slow cooker all the time, it's like you never really see your full potential because
Mm.
you never push to your edge. And uh, yeah, so you never know how far you can really take it. And you never know what you're capable of because you're always staying within your comfort zone and what you have done, as opposed to like, well, I've done this. So yeah, but what if I could go that much further? Like maybe you have this incremental um, sort of advance on what you'd done before. So, and I think that's part of why that band, just as an example, it sounds very extreme, but I'm actually also trying to paint it in a positive light too, is
Mm-hmm.
that's part of why that band is very successful and growing a lot now, is
Right.
because of doing things that no one else is willing to do. And that's something I'm trying to embrace more. And I've tried to do since this period of being at home and trying to, approach other strategies is like what am I willing to do that other people aren't willing to do? Can I go the extra mile and add something to the music, or to my craft in general, that will give it this extra edge, um, and just feel like I'm giving more.
Mm.
Because this whole music thing and making art in general, it's give give give, you know what I mean? That's what it
Mm.
is. Like because at the end of the day, it's like if you're not spent, then you haven't like shared your gift.
I like what you said about turning up the heat, like really
Yeah.
like challenge, like making it almost seem impossible, and kind of like sometimes when there's a bit of panic, like
Yeah.
you don't want too much, but like when there's a bit of that stress, sometimes stress is good, and you put that on yourself, and then yeah, it's almost athletic. Like
Yeah.
you're pushing those invisible boundaries and stretching yourself. I totally know what you mean.
That stuff is super tricky, but I think internal values also are super important. Like just being uh hungry for the things that are important to you, just having something that drives you every day.
Mhm.
For me, it's like not a day goes by where I don't think about like, okay, how can I basically find some new step forward, in terms of like sharing the art making that I'm doing and getting it, reaching more people or reaching people in a new way. Like I'm just really starving for that all the time. I'm just, I really feel like I can't stop thinking about it. So it's very important to me, and that might seem like a little bit psycho, but that's just,
No.
I know that if I don't do that, no one's going to take care of it for me.
Yeah.
And, all that music that I've put so much time and, so much life energy into is just going to fade away.
Yeah.
If I don't keep kind of plugging away and trying different things and communicating with people in the community and, being out there,
Yeah.
like pounding the pavement, because eventually, like after a certain number of years of doing that and then being consistent, as we were talking about with habits, it's like you need to have a certain amount of consistency if you want anything to work out for you.
It's I think you're exactly the right person that I want to talk to right now. Like this has been in my mind, like this word consistency has been in my mind, and just like realizing that I have a problem with it, you know. I do. And I mean most people do to a degree, but I'm just really that's really been floating around in my mind. Well, I wanted to tell you that I listened to your album and it was gorgeous. It was really special. So,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
congratulations on
Oh.
that.
Well, I released a solo album last year called Worlds Within, and yeah, this was the first full record that I'd done under my own name. Yeah, it's a different approach to making music, and I think it just took me a certain amount of time to give myself permission to feel like it was actually something that I was allowed to do. Not that I couldn't do it, but that I was giving myself the permission. And that's a weird thing.
Mhm.
Sometimes we block ourselves from doing something that we need to do. Once I started playing with the loop pedal, then there were other parts of me that started to emerge that I was allowing myself to explore.
Mm.
And those creative avenues were very different from what I had done previously. Like what I had done sort of from 2013 through like 2016 or so was very much about trying to get as much out of the instrument as possible in real time.
Mhm.
And, approaching it like when you play a solo sonata and you've got like big chords and you've got lots of kind of bow action and arpeggiation and like, counterpoint and all that kind of stuff to make the instrument sound bigger. Maybe you're like bowing and doing a left-hand pizzicato at the same time, trying to be virtuosic and big, with one instrument. And then I started kind of exploring other sides of my playing because of the looping. Because if you try to get that busy with looping, you hit a wall pretty fast.
Yeah.
It's more about being minimal with each loop, but having them work well together. In the same
Mhm.
way that if you had a band with many members, you wouldn't want them all to be playing too much, because then it kind of spoils the arrangement. It's sort of
Mhm.
like there's too much stuff going on, and it can take away from the feeling of groove or the feeling that the music is breathing. And I was recording a lot of demos on my phone basically, and just kind of storing them throughout the years. And there were a couple from that period that really stuck out to me. I kept on kind of listening back to them. I thought, this is cool. I could create like a piece out of this. And then
Mhm.
I started exploring that world more, and then it turned into more little pieces. And then eventually I thought, okay, maybe I could do an EP. And then, I could probably make a full album out of this. I really thought, okay, maybe no one cares about this stupid vanity project. Like it might just be like some, bad, like ambient post rock on cello thing, or it might be just some like me trying to, whatever.
Those voices of doubt creeped in.
Yeah. And then when the record reached the mixing stage, then I thought, okay, this has potential, and I like where this is going. And by the end of it, I really felt like it was like maybe the best record I'd made,
Mm.
in my career, where I felt like I was the most satisfied with the artistic outcome, and that the sort of what we were trying to do in mixing and the different effects that we were trying to achieve musically all seemed to work, like 95% of it felt like it worked for me, which is quite high because usually I have a hard time listening to my own records.
Mhm.
So, and then the record got a really good reception, when it came out in 2020. But then, of course, the pandemic happened like only a couple months after the album came out. So I only got to play a couple shows. And, but the reception kind of continued to grow through the year. It's like the album kind of continued to get out there, gradually. I did some live stream shows, played the material. I had to kind of force myself to learn all the material live, which I wasn't expecting to do. I thought, okay, this album might be too difficult to play live because it's so layered.
Mm.
We had like 950 channels of audio in the session,
Wow.
which is an insane amount. It was a huge session, with a ton of layering and a ton of different parts. And I found a way to, go back to the roots of it, which is with the loop pedal,
Yeah.
using a bigger loop station, and play all of it live. And then basically, I just kind of thought, it would be cool to do a live version of this album, because a lot of people that follow what I do aren't here, and they're in other countries, and I might not get to share this with them, in like a proper setting for a long time.
Mhm.
And it would be cool to kind of show what it looks like when I play it live with the pedals, and kind of I guess put a new spin on something that people know and I think a lot of people appreciate, and to try to revisit the material, because I felt like I understood the meaning of the music much better.
Mhm.
It was one of these albums that revealed itself to me over time,
Mhm.
whereas like while I was making it, it felt very amorphous, and I was kind of, it's like, you're finding the sculpture in the marble, and then you see it clearly at the end. And I kind of uh, started to get more in touch with what the music meant to me, uh, and through playing it, I think through playing
Mhm.
it live and understanding the meaning of all the tracks, and sort of the greater conceptual arc, and ways of playing things that maybe felt more compelling, and changing certain arrangements so they would work better live. And um, yeah, so now I have two versions. Now I've got Worlds Within, and I've got Worlds Within Live, which came out a couple weeks ago, and that's
Yeah.
like a revisited version of that. Uh, but it's cool because I was able to kind of add to this universe a little bit, and extend a release that, you know, came out maybe at an unfortunate time, and just sort of like ride it out a little bit longer with, you know, a deeper exploration of that world. Like this music, it had this kind of spaciousness and atmosphere, where being really expressive and having this very vocal sound, that's very passionate with a lot of long lines. I feel like it's the first time where that playing has really kind of clicked for me, and I had to find it in my own way doing this, you know, doing amplified cello. And um, one of the big catalysts for that was the listening to like Armenian duduk music, and that
Mm.
instrument is like so incredibly evocative. I think even more than cello. Like people talk about the cello being very emotional, but I think it's even more than that. And it just has this sadness and kind of lamentation that, I mean, it's basically synonymous with. And that's like the thing that inspires me the most when I play those long lines. As I think about that, I think about this like Armenian music and these like mountains and sort of yeah, just the sorrow in it. You know, for me, that's I connect with that more basically
Yeah.
than.
Yeah, you can definitely hear. I mean, I could definitely hear like all a lot of different musical influences coming together, and even the structure of the work, like having four sort of big movements and having it sort of be an arc. I saw it kind of like an arc.
Yeah,
And it's very symphonic in that sense, like the four movement sort of piece structure. And going off of what you were saying of those, like those voices of doubt, like, oh, maybe this is just another like atmospheric, you know, whatever. I actually had a thought about that when I was listening. I thought it's amazing how it can be heard in different contexts. Like in one sense, I felt like I could, you know, sit down and really be present and listen and go into that world and have a very conscious listening experience. But on the other hand, I can also imagine having it playing while I'm doing something, and that being also a very pleasant, you know, like atmospheric but in a good way sort of sound world to be in.
that's nice to hear actually. I mean, there's a lot of music that I can listen to, yeah, while working or while like, I don't know, biking or walking or whatever, like doing something else, where I feel like it can sort of accompany that activity. And then other things where it's like I need to just be focused on that music because
Yeah.
otherwise it's not effective.
But this kind of
And
does both, which is awesome. Like it can be both depending on what headspace one is in. Like I think that the word atmospheric kind of gets a bad rep because as string players, we've been to so many, you know, like sessions or whatever where like the string writing is like whole notes and it's like this is just about the impression of strings and you know,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
we need to like rebrand that because there's some there's a strength to atmospheric you know that atmospheric quality that's very complex and very deep and also can be really wonderful, you know.
Yeah, to me, it's about world building. That's part of where the album title comes
Yeah.
from. It's like, you know, when you read a novel or you watch a film and there's like, or a series, you know, because now that stuff is kind of replacing film, but it's like the immersiveness of the world and the uniqueness is one of the things that makes it engaging, and the feeling that
Mhm.
you kind of fall in love with those characters and their environment that they're in and the struggles that they have feel almost personal to you because they're so compelling. And it's like it's really just like this small, you know, it's imaginary, but it means a lot to you when you're in it. And
Mhm.
that's kind of part of the idea of the record. Is it's like you could have this like microscopic world that actually, you know, when you go through that portal, it's like you're discovering all of the, you know, the creatures that populate it, you know, in the sort of like
Mhm.
you know, Alice in Wonderland type of way.
Yeah.
And it's just, it has its own internal logic. Some composers might criticize the record because it's all in one kind of mode. You know, there's no real modulation that happens. It uses basically the same harmonies the whole way through. But for me, it's like that's actually the fabric that ties it all together, is the modality, the sort of the realm that it exists in, and also these motifs that are kind of like these characters that are morphing. It's more like an organism that starts off like a, you know, in the sort of kind of almost like a prehistoric ooze, and then sort of like comes up onto land, and then eventually becomes this more complex form, and then eventually kind of goes back into the sea. It's sort of like beginning in this unending ether, and in the infinite, and then discovering itself in its infancy, and then getting perspective on itself. And it's like the journey of a life cycle or whatever, and then going through this sort of almost like a midlife crisis, which is that tumult movement in the middle, which is
Yeah.
kind of like the pièce de résistance, of the whole thing. And then it kind of afterwards, it sort of like runs out of steam, and this fade afterglow movement is kind of like accepting what is and surrendering, and then returning to the infinite at the end, where the first and last
Wow.
movement are the same piece, but the
Mhm.
harmony is different. So the
Yep.
only thing that changes is the bass notes, but all the other stuff is pretty much the same. But then of course, when you have different bass notes, then you respond to them differently with whatever you play over that. So those are kind of the ideas underlying the record. And
I love that idea of a cycle, what you said, like how you described that prehistoric ooze. And I really just visualized this whole thing while you were talking. That's amazing.
cool. Well, one
Yeah.
thing I had imagined, I didn't end up doing it, but I had thought, okay, what if I was able to like have an accompanying film for the whole record? And
Mm,
my impression of the beginning and ending movements was really that they were like a world without humans,
mm-hmm.
in it. It's sort of like it's got this objectivity because it doesn't have like our sense of impatience. It's this feeling of
Yeah.
um uh feeling time on this other scale, like mountains and forests and
Mhm.
oceans and stuff. The sense of time is very different because it's like, yeah, the scale, the ruler you're using to measure is much bigger,
Right,
the
right.
intervals, whereas
Yeah.
for us it's like, oh man, I didn't get this thing done today, like this year or whatever. But in their life cycles, it's like not even the blink of an eye, it's just,
Right.
it's like infinitesimally small. So it was this sense of like juxtaposing, time in nature that's like so spread out and so infinite, with human time that's so subjective, and the clock is ticking and we're measuring it with like machines, and we're kind of always aware of it. And this sort of continuum where it's like, it kind of, it starts off with these huge expanses, and then everything gets really compressed, and then it goes back out at the end.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Really cool. Something that struck me about when you were describing the creation process was that, initially we had talked about like having these sort of turning up the heat and, you know, kind of sprinting to the finish line with getting projects done. But then there's this whole other side too, where things percolate over several years and it's sort of going on as life is happening, but there's just these little pockets of time where you're in the right headspace and you just kind of add to it, and then it just sits and develops, and then there's so much strength to that process too, to
Yeah. What was really nice about it was that there was no expectation. I didn't really tell a lot of people that I was doing it.
yeah, yeah.
And partly because I really didn't know what to expect of it. And I hadn't made a record like that before in that style. It felt more vulnerable in the sense that it wasn't a record that had any pretensions, I guess, of being flashy or impressive. Yeah, it's been really cool to explore it so deeply. I didn't really think that I would get to do that, but it's become a much bigger project. Even the live version, originally it was like, okay, I'm just going to do one video, and then I enjoyed doing that first video so much, I thought, let's just do the rest of the album, because I think that it would be cool to have that. It would be cool for other people to see it and see how, sort of how it's all made, you know.
Mhm.
And then I thought, well, if I'm going to record all the pieces, I should make a digital album so people can just listen to it also. And then I thought, well, I should just make a CD also, because it would be good to have a physical version. And I got this great new album cover which complements the old album cover so well, that I thought, if I don't have a physical version, it's going to be like criminal, because it's so good. And then now it's out on CD, and I've sold a lot of the CDs, but now I'm thinking, okay, how do I, get a vinyl release? Because a lot of people will probably only buy it if it's on vinyl. And I also think I would love to have the vinyl, you know what I mean? So it's like all of these steps, these offshoots. But what's cool is when you come up with something that bears that fruit, you know, or it's like you have a great analogy is like the turkey dinner, you know, not that I think that's a great thing, but if you have like a turkey dinner, you have all these leftovers, you know, you've got the actual thing, it's like all this food, you're stuffed, but then you've got like all of these incremental leftovers for days and days and days. So you
Mm-hmm.
make like a body of work
Yeah.
that's like you can kind of parse it out and like, you know, use these leftovers and continue to sort of I guess just spread it a little bit further,
Mm-hmm.
which is a great way to ride out a record or just a general musical concept.
So you
So
could
that it,
so you
yeah,
can feed more people with your
exactly,
art.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the
That's a
idea.
wonderful, very vivid analogy that I think a lot of people can grasp very easily like that.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to look at the way you disseminate and market music too. You know, because I think that when you use like the word marketing, I
I
hate
know.
that word. Oh, it's
I know.
awful. You
I
know,
know.
and whenever
Even when I
every
say it and we both know what we mean by it, but I,
oh
I
yeah.
still feel like cheap or something.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
feels like a betrayal, you know, and I feel really gross. It's like, oh, I've revealed my true disgusting self after all, and people can see that I don't have this real integrity after all. I'm actually, you know, this just
Oh,
this, you know,
it's
cold
sad.
businessman.
It's sad though because that's the capitalist world that we live in, and we need to exist as artists within that world. So we're
Yeah.
sort of forced to embrace those elements, but at the same time, it doesn't feel authentic. And then we're kind of like we feel this weird external and internal shame for doing so, but it's also,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you
You
know,
just hit the nail on the head there with the it's the shame part. I was just gonna say also like it's that aspect of it. It's the again, you know, we were talking about society and the idea that
yeah.
society is felt more than it is like, you know, seen visibly. And I think that in music in particular, there's this idea of like, well, you need to stay pure, you know, and you need to just focus on the music. And well, that's true, but like in the world we live in now, if you don't kind of if you're not your own entrepreneur, like who's going to do it for you? You know, you have to, you have to kind of take that up and like, as you do it more, you get more graceful at it. Like for me, you know, when I started trying to promote my own music, I think I was a lot more heavy handed with it. And then I understood sort of how to communicate with it and how to share it in a way that felt more harmonious with the art. But the idea that, you know, one shouldn't market one's own music, that yeah, it comes from this idea of like shaming people for example, wanting to get paid properly and
Yeah.
like, you know, just wanting to have the conditions that everybody else has. I think it's very naive to, you know, talk about someone's job and or their vocation, I guess, and to sort of have those ideas or say those things because, you know, we're all kind of in the same boat with it, just it manifests itself in different ways.
Mhm.
um but yeah, like in terms of the marketing of it, I mean, I think it's not a great word, but I've tried to be creative with how I communicate and think about it more as like it's more about community and it's more about sharing, and for me performing is about giving anyway. And
Mhm.
so it's like, okay, what can I like give to my audience that will add value to their lives? And, you know, how can I find some point of unity, I guess, or like something that people can all, you know, connect on, that we have in common. You know, those things are interesting. And also showing that I don't take myself too seriously with it, that
Mhm.
like, you know, I have a sense of humor also. I'm like a real person, and, you know, not just like some sort of abstraction, you know, from like an
Mhm.
actual person,
I
you
think
know.
it's the
Yeah,
trap that we all fall into to some degree on social media, right? Because if you know the contact you're having, well, there's another element of just like let's say you're just taking someone's music in and then you have this self-constructed vision of what they might be like. So there's that. But then there's also the social media aspect where you're seeing a slice of what they're like
yeah,
or a slice of what how they want to appear, how they want to build their public persona. And I get again, I don't think anyone should be shamed for also like, you know, I've talked to people about, they've said, you know, yeah, I have an alter ego when I perform and it's
right,
completely a created thing. If you think about drag performers or you know, clowns, or there's all sorts of artists that have an alter ego even to lesser degrees than that, you know, musicians
yeah,
who, yeah, I'm like Beyonce on stage, but then you get me like off stage and I'm a total shy kind of introvert.
Yeah, I think that communicating online is funny because some people are much more open online than they are in person. You know, these worlds are quite different. And uh yeah, some people are a lot more extroverted on the internet because it's easier to be in a certain way. You have a bit of a shield and you don't have the physical, to go along with it. It's very different. But it's interesting what you said about people being maybe more outgoing on stage and more shy in person. I definitely relate to that. I think actually I'm pretty shy by nature,
Mhm.
and I'm not the type of person who's going to like be at a social event and go up to people and like shake hands with them and say, hey, I'm so and so, and and start chatting them up. Like, I'm not the guy that does that. I'm the guy that like waits to get introduced to people, you know what I mean? And doesn't yeah, I'm not that type of person, but I feel like when I'm playing music, then I can get real and none of that matters. It's like, okay, now I can be me, you know,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
And but in terms of the social media, my feeling is that like, yeah, it's tricky because on one hand I think it's basically indispensable. Like, you need that to be able to reach your people if you're trying to do something creative. Like, you may not find all those people in your immediate physical area. You probably won't. So, like, you have to be able to put the feelers out and find people who resonate with what it is that you do. So that means you have to be out there often enough that those people also kind of feel like there's something that they can latch onto over time, which kind of gets them more invested in what you do, and to understand you, or just feel like it's part of their existence. It's like, oh yeah, I'm kind of interested in these people, and I listen to this, or I watch this, or whatever.
So
So
interesting
that's
how you said it's part of their existence because it's so true. We were talking earlier about this habit of scrolling, right? Who you follow, I
yeah.
mean, they kind of live rent free in your head. If you think
Yeah,
about it,
yeah, it's
y-
true.
you're
Yeah.
this guy's rent free right now. Like if you think about like, you think
Yeah.
about like if we're all being honest, we're like walking down the street, whatever, doing our shit, and suddenly we get like a thought about someone on social media that's like not even someone you necessarily care about, but like if you follow someone, in a sense, they're part of your daily routine.
Yeah,
Like
definitely if
and
you follow them and
and
if you
that's
engage it with them too.
if you
Yeah.
exactly, I guess if the algorithm decides you're going to see them, or see their posts or whatever, so that's a strength, that's an unbelievable uh that's an
Yeah.
unbelievable uh um uh, untapped but also being tapped resource
You're
where
being tapped, your mind is.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you're kind of
Yeah.
ninjing your, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, it's incredible. I don't think we don't know the effects of all of this, and we won't know for a long time. I do think there's probably a lot of negatives, but I think I'm all for artists like promoting themselves and using that as a tool. And it's so weird that that's become, yeah, as you say, like totally essential for building your career. And it's weird because some it comes naturally to some people and then to others it doesn't. So the people who it doesn't come naturally to, they kind of have to learn if they're
Yeah.
gonna it it's odd. It's this platform that we're having to navigate, and it's changing so fast.
Yeah, and all the platforms are different and they're all changing too. So each one has its own behavior and its
Yeah.
own people. Yeah, I was definitely one of those people that I didn't have the vocabulary to communicate properly using it in the beginning.
Can you share a bit of, I guess, sort of practical wisdom with myself and whoever might be listening? What as a musician, as an artist, how do you best navigate those platforms, and what specific how do you specifically use them?
It's a big question, and it's one that's like it's always kind of changing. But one of the things that really hit me was that during this pandemic period, if I didn't use it seriously and really, like, I was already using it a fair bit before then. It's not like I had no experience, but I think in the last year and a bit is when I really started to wield it, because I was like, this is all I've got. So the first thing that changed for me was that my concept of social media before was like sharing a finished product.
Mm,
Here's the art. I
mm,
made it. It's done. Thank all the people involved. and then hope you enjoy it. Please check it out type thing. I am promoting this. You can see that I'm trying to like sell this thing to you. Um, but that's not really that cool. You know what I mean? When you're trying to like market something, it's like, for example, the commercials of the 50s would have told you like, this thing is really good, you should buy it. Then
Mm,
by like the 90s, it was like something silly or weird about that thing, but it didn't actually explicitly sell you the product. It just made you aware of it. The
mm,
awareness is more important at first than the conversion, right? Awareness and conversion are two concepts in marketing, and you have to start with awareness. You can't convert people right away, like, cold turkey. Like, they have to be warmed up to it. It's like, imagine every one of your social media platforms, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, um, as a party. It's like you're hosting the party,
mm,
and you invite basically people into the party by doing something that seems like it's cool.
mm,
I mean, I hate to say it, but again, the FOMO is important here, because if you do something that's like, whoa, what is that? Then they want to go into your party. And then uh, if they think it's interesting, maybe they'll invite some friends. But the important thing is that you keep those people in your party, that they're staying there, that they're not going, oh, well, there's another thing happening upstairs. Why don't we just ditch this one and check that one out? You know,
mm,
and the way you do that is you take care of those people. What I didn't do so much in the past was that I didn't really understand who my audience was as consciously. Like now I really know my audience. I know the people, I know their names. Like I've had conversations with a lot of them online. I know who's bought what. I know who's buying stuff and who's streaming stuff and who's not buying stuff, and all of that. You want to give them a VIP experience.
mm,
You want to say, okay, this is the party you want to be in. I started sharing raw content, is what I call it, where I just stick the phone in front of myself and I just record a video playing something that I'm working on, and that stuff went down super well right away. And
mm,
then I I started doing that, and then I had a live stream, which is about a year ago now exactly, where I played like most of Worlds Within and a bunch of my other solo stuff. It was like my first full concert on a live stream. And leading up to that, in order to promote, like I didn't have like really a whole lot of material I could work with, so I just recorded myself playing parts of what I would do, and I
mm,
just took snippets of things that I thought were interesting, and it doubled this practice. And I posted almost every day in that period. So I started to get more consistent. After that show was done, I felt really motivated. And then I thought, okay, I want to do more of this. I got a better phone camera, and I started doing even more of these videos, and I started branching out into like, well, what if I try covering this thing? I'd done covers before, but only like really like studio versions. What if
mm,
I just do like a segment? Because again, these platforms reward content that's a bit shorter.
mm.
YouTube is good for long form content, but when you're dealing with like social media,
Mhm.
these platforms, you're looking more at like 1-2 minutes.
It's so interesting how at the same time, so we have these like platforms growing, like things like TikTok, where I mean, if you're not doing something interesting right away, I mean,
Oh
people are
yeah.
just gonna, right? So it's like this very, very, and the algorithm is so favored towards very, very quick dopamine release in the viewer. But
Yeah.
at the same time, there's this real with the podcast medium, which is huge, there's almost this counterculture of long form discussion that's happening. So it seems like either people kind of are responding to either, or maybe it's different demographics, but it's interesting how they're both kind of rising in popularity, but they're so polar opposite in that
That's
sense.
that's a great observation. I think it's very similar to the way vinyl came back almost as a reaction to streaming. When you have things that go, one thing goes to the extreme, the other one will too. It's like kind of like a law of polarity, I guess you could say. And I think, yeah, when you have so much stuff that's short form and it's whizzing by you so fast, mentally that's exhausting because your mind is doing this task switching.
Mhm.
So it's a lot more soothing to listen to a podcast, over a long period of time, that kind of like mellows you out and kind of unwinds you a little bit. I think those are all good things to keep in mind with this stuff. The other way I looked at it was like, when you're making these things, it's like if you make a piece of content or whatever and you put it out, it's like you're cooking a meal. It's like you kind of get all the ingredients ready, and then you just kind of you throw them in the stew, and then you just get the heat going, and then you
Yeah.
just let it percolate, and just see how it goes. But you're not there's also maybe a degree of like non-attachment, that
Mm.
helps you stay sane, because it's very
Yeah.
easy
To
to
get sucked
make
in.
everything, yeah, everything gets blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
It's like
Post and go, just kind of like boundaries on that. Yeah, I get that.
I think just like, yeah, being able to step away for a second, yeah, it's a weird thing, and it does take a lot of time too. In a way, it's like it's amazing how much time it sucks out of your day. So I think being
Yeah.
able to like get other things that are high priority done before posting is a
Mm.
really good idea, especially if you think it's going to be something that's very high traffic,
Mm.
or if you feel like you're going to get over invested in it, that like you've done something for yourself before that
Right.
isn't going to get fragmented by the awareness of there's that other thing that's like tugging at me over here, and I'm,
Yeah.
you know what
Or
I
wanting
mean?
to check how it's doing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
what I mean, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's
Yeah.
exactly that. Just not having that and just having a bit of your own headspace first is good. Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah. I love following you. I think you're doing a really good job with all of that. So,
Thank you. I appreciate it a lot. Well, likewise, it's awesome that you're doing this podcast. I listened to a bunch of the interviews and
oh, that
really,
means a lot. Thank
yeah,
you.
I really enjoyed them. And yeah, it's, for me, it's inspiring to get to hear that stuff and to hear those exchanges and to kind of like reflect on that from my own perspective. And that
Well,
adds a lot of value. And I think it brings a lot of great people to light.
thank you so much for being a part of it.
Yeah, it's
I
totally my pleasure. Yeah, this is
yeah,
an awesome chat we've had today. And
really, I'm sure you know this, but I just every time we talk, I feel so like inspired, and I just respect you so much as an artist. Like it's yeah.
well, it's really nice
Uh,
to hear.
Thank you, Rav.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.